This video is based on ancient mythology and does not present historical facts. It focuses on the interpretation of mythic tradition and symbolism. Apollo, the god of light, falls in love with a woman, but that woman, Daphne, does not want him to the very end. And that is why the famous Greek mythology story of Apollo and Daphne is not a love story fulfilled. It is a love tragedy about desire that never reaches its target, and a change that can never be undone. At its core, this story is simpler than it seems. Apollo wants Daphne. Daphne wants to escape Apollo. One moves closer, the other runs. And in the final moment, instead of being caught, Daphne becomes something else entirely. So from the beginning, this Greek myth is less a romance and more a story about one person's desire crashing into another person's refusal. First, let's picture the scene as clearly as possible. Apollo is one of the most striking gods in Greek and Roman mythology. He is the god of light, music, and prophecy. He is often described as beautiful, gifted, and deeply confident. Daphne is very different. She wants to live freely in the wild, close to the forest and nature. In many versions of the tradition, she is the daughter of the river god Peneus, and she is drawn as someone who wants an independent life, rather than becoming anyone's wife. So even from the start, they are moving in completely different directions. Apollo wants to approach. Daphne does not want to belong to anyone. What starts this story is not love, it is pride. One day, Apollo defeats the monster Python and feels full of himself. He boasts about his skill with the bow. Then he looks down on Eros, the god of love. He mocks the young god for carrying a bow at all. It is a short moment, but it matters. In Greek mythology, major tragedy often begins with a very small act of arrogance. Eros does not let the insult pass. He prepares two arrows. One causes love, the other pushes love away. Then he shoots Apollo with the arrow of desire, and Daphne with the arrow of rejection. That is the moment the whole structure of the story locks into place. Apollo suddenly longs for Daphne with all his heart. Daphne, on the other hand, wants nothing to do with love at all. One is pulled in, the other pulls away. That imbalance is what drives this myth all the way to the end. Now the scene becomes very clear. The moment Apollo sees Daphne, he falls for her. He follows her at once. He tells her who he is. He says he is not some wild hunter or dangerous stranger. He is the son of Zeus. He is the god of prophecy and music. In simple terms, he tries to win her over by explaining how great he is. But none of that matters to Daphne. What matters more than Apollo's power, beauty, or status is one simple fact: she does not want this relationship. So Daphne runs. Apollo chases her. This is the part of the story that matters most, because the tragedy is already almost decided here. Apollo speaks the language of love, but what Daphne feels is not love. It is pressure. It is fear. Apollo wants to get closer. Daphne wants to get away. Their feelings are moving in completely opposite directions, which means this relationship can never stand on equal ground. The details change a little depending on the version, but in the best-known telling, Daphne keeps running until she reaches her limit. She realizes she cannot escape by her own strength anymore. So in the final moment, she calls out to her father, the river god, and asks for help. Protect me. Change me if you must, but let me escape this. It is a desperate prayer, but it is also a clear choice. Daphne chooses becoming something else over being taken, and that request is answered. Her body begins to change. Her feet root into the earth. Her skin hardens. Her arms become branches. Her hair becomes leaves. In the end, Daphne turns into a laurel tree. Apollo reaches her, but he is too late. The Daphne he wanted is no longer standing before him in human form. That is how the legend of Apollo and Daphne ends. Not with love fulfilled, but with transformation. Not with union, but with loss. And with understanding that comes far too late. Then comes the final image of the story. Apollo does not leave. He stays before the laurel tree that Daphne has become, and he declares that it will be his sacred tree. From that point on, the laurel becomes one of Apollo's symbols. Victors wear laurel crowns. Poets and heroes are honored with laurel leaves. And if you trace the origin of the laurel wreath back to this myth, what you find at the beginning is not simple joy or glory, but the shadow of a relationship that never came to be. That is the basic story. Apollo falls in love. Daphne does not want him. The chase continues. Daphne changes herself to protect herself, and Apollo, unable to have her, keeps only her image as a symbol. Even that simple structure is enough to understand the core of this Greek mythology tale. But what makes this story stay with us, even now? To me, this myth does not read like a tragic romance in the usual sense. It feels more like a deeply uncomfortable and honest story about how easily one person's will can disappear under the name of love. And that is why this myth feels ancient and modern at the same time. The first thing that stands out is the imbalance of feeling. Apollo may have been sincere. He may truly have believed that he loved Daphne. But from Daphne's side, that sincerity means something completely different. One person's passion can become another person's fear. That simple truth is exactly why the story of Apollo and Daphne still matters today. We often act as if strong feelings are enough on their own. But in any relationship, the size of a feeling is not the only thing that matters. What matters even more is whether both people are facing the same direction. That is also why this myth can be read as a story about refusal and consent. Daphne never wanted this from the beginning. She clearly wanted distance. But Apollo is so focused on his own feelings that he fails to truly see Daphne's fear and rejection. From a modern point of view, that part feels very clear. Love does not erase the other person's choice. If anything, love should be the first thing that respects it. That may be the reason this myth still feels so alive. The basics of human relationships have not changed, even after thousands of years. There is also a powerful irony in Apollo himself. He is the god of light. He stands for order, harmony, prophecy, and reason. And yet in this story, he fails to see the one thing that matters most. He does not see Daphne's heart. He does not understand what his feelings look like from her side. There is something especially bitter about that. The god of light cannot read another person's boundary. It feels like a reminder that being great, beautiful, or admired does not mean you truly understand others. This story can also be read through the lens of power. Apollo is not just anyone. Among the ancient gods, he carries authority, beauty, and overwhelming presence. His name alone can fill the world around him. Daphne, by contrast, is the one forced to run. That difference turns the story into more than a failed romance. It becomes a story about unequal power. And what makes it even more interesting is that Apollo does not see himself as evil. He believes his feelings are real. That is exactly what makes the myth more complex. Sometimes confident good intentions can become more dangerous than open cruelty. And if we place Daphne at the center, the story changes again. Many people remember this legend as Apollo's loss. But in another sense, the true center of the myth is Daphne's choice. She chooses to protect herself, rather than remain the object of someone else's love. Of course, the ending is not simply beautiful. Daphne has to lose her human form in order to keep her freedom. So this is not a clean victory. And it is not complete rescue either. It is closer to tragedy. It shows that protecting yourself can sometimes demand an unbearable price. Even so, Daphne never gives up her will. That matters. In many later readings, she is not just a beautiful woman being chased. She is someone who keeps saying, "I do not want this," all the way to the end. And that refusal is never erased. In a modern reading, this can also become a powerful, woman-centered story. Instead of remaining an object inside someone else's desire, she becomes someone who protects her own boundary at any cost. Eros's two arrows are also a brilliant symbol. One creates love, the other drives it away. It is fantastical, but it also feels very true to real life. Feelings are rarely equal. One person falls faster, another pulls back. One sees destiny, the other feels burden. This Greek myth turns that emotional mismatch into something vivid and unforgettable through the image of divine Eros. That is one reason it remains so easy to understand, even now. Then there is the symbol of the laurel, which gives the story an even longer life. Usually, a laurel wreath stands for victory and glory. But once you know this myth, the meaning shifts. The laurel Apollo wears is not just a sign of honor. It is the trace of someone he could never truly reach. In other words, behind one of the brightest symbols lies one of the quietest losses. That is one reason this detail feels so powerful. People often survive by turning what they lost into memory, ritual, or symbol. A past love becomes a story. A failure becomes a badge. A wound becomes part of identity. Apollo's laurel feels like that kind of memory. If we read this only as a love story, we miss too much. It is also a story about where love must stop. Strong feelings do not become right just because they are strong. Wanting someone does not give you the right to step into their life. That simple principle may be the part that speaks most directly to people today. If you ask why this myth still feels relevant, that is the answer I would give. It speaks in the language of ancient myth, but its ethics feel very close to our own. At the same time, this is also a story about regret. Apollo never truly gets Daphne. What he ends up with is not a living relationship, but a symbol. And that ending does not feel like punishment alone. It feels more like the tragedy of understanding too late. Some feelings can be sincere and still leave damage that cannot be undone. Some realizations can be right and still arrive too late. This myth captures that kind of late sorrow with remarkable clarity. It also holds beauty and discomfort at the same time. On the surface, the images are almost poetic. The god of light, the woman, running through the forest, leaves moving in the wind, the laurel becoming an eternal symbol. But emotionally, the structure of the story is not light at all. Inside the beauty is a deeply uncomfortable truth. That is why the myth lasts. It is beautiful to picture, but painful to think about. That may also be why later artists kept returning to Apollo and Daphne again and again. In sculpture and painting, they were drawn to the moment of change itself, the instant when someone is still human, but is becoming a tree. The instant when someone is almost within reach, but is about to become unreachable forever. That edge is dramatic. Human beings are always drawn to threshold moments like that. Love, just before it ends. A choice just before it cannot be undone. The final second, when words still could have changed everything. This myth holds that tension perfectly. To me, the real bitterness of the story lives there. We are often taught to see love as beautiful. But in real life, love does not always lead to something good. Sometimes people let their own feelings grow, so large that they fail to understand the person in front of them. Sometimes they only realize what they lost after it is gone. And sometimes, even regret arrives too late to matter. The myth of Apollo and Daphne shows that hard truth with elegance and restraint. So this Greek mythology story is not just Apollo loved Daphne, but it did not work out. That summary is too simple. A more honest reading is this. It is a story about what happens when one person's desire collides with another person's freedom. And what remains in the end is not the triumph of love, but memory reduced to symbol. If we were to say it in today's language, it might sound like this love is not only the power to move closer, it is also the power to stop. If the other person does not want it, stopping in that moment is what defines the beginning and the end of the relationship. That sentence is not written directly inside the myth, of course, but it feels like the whole story is leading us there. In the end, the legend of Apollo and Daphne leaves us with one simple image. A god reaches out his hand, A woman keeps trying to escape, and in the final moment, love hardens, not into fulfillment, but into the symbol of loss. That is why the laurel is beautiful. But its beauty carries sadness. Its leaves do not hold only victory. They also carry the shadow of desire that understood itself too late. Apollo was the god of light, but in this story, he could not see another person's heart. Daphne ran without rest. Yet, she remains the one who held on to her will until the end. And the laurel became a symbol of glory, but buried in its roots is the grief of a relationship that was never truly reached. Maybe that is why this myth still feels so powerful. It is a story about ancient gods, but the emotions inside it are deeply modern. Love still blinds people. Rejection is still too easily ignored. Regret still comes late, and people still go on, living by turning what they have lost into symbols they can carry. In the end, the story of Apollo and Daphne asks us one hard question. When you call something love, are you truly seeing the other person, or are you only seeing the ending you want? And as long as that question still lingers, this old Greek myth will keep sounding like a story about us.